There is nothing visible happening right now. No sudden change, no external signal, no extraordinary event. And yet, something is being built at this exact moment. Silently. Without apparent effort. Without you even noticing. The reality you will live in the next few hours, the next few days, maybe even the next few years, has already begun to take shape. And the strangest part is that it doesn't depend on what you do on the outside. It depends on something much more subtle, something most people completely ignore. Imagine for a moment that there is an invisible process happening around you all the time. A process that makes no noise, leaves no obvious traces, but never stops. It keeps running while you work, while you talk, while you sleep. And even now, as you listen to this, it is active. The question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you are aware of it. Because if you're not, it keeps operating, just without your participation. The camera slowly approaches something you've never paid attention to. A common thought, something simple, almost insignificant. That quick idea that crosses your mind and disappears within seconds. It seems harmless, too small to have any impact. But it's not, because that is exactly where everything begins. Every reality, every result, every experience you live is first born in this invisible place. And the problem is that most people only pay attention to the final result. When something has already happened, when it's already too late to understand what caused it. But the process didn't start there. It started much earlier. It started in silence. There is a pattern happening, repeatedly, every single day. A thought arises. Right after, an emotion forms around it. And this combination begins to send a kind of signal. It's not something you can see, but it's something you can feel. An internal frequency. A kind of invisible signature that you are constantly emitting. And this emission doesn't stay still. It expands. It interacts with the environment. It influences decisions, behaviors, perceptions. And little by little it starts organizing events around you. Not in a magical fantasy sense, but in a precise, consistent, almost mechanical way. As if there were a logic behind all of this. And here is the point that almost no one notices. You don't start creating your reality when you act. You start much earlier than that. The moment you think, the moment you feel, the moment you react internally to something. And this is happening all the time. Even when you think you're doing nothing, even when you're distracted, even when you're on autopilot, the process continues, always, without pause, without interruption. And that's why so many people say life seems to happen to them instead of being created by them. Because they are looking in the wrong place. They are looking outward, trying to understand effects, while the cause remains invisible. Now think about something simple. Have you ever noticed how a single thought can completely change your state? How a memory can shift your mood in seconds? How an expectation can generate anxiety even before something happens? This is not random. This is the beginning of the process. That's where reality starts to take shape. Not in the event itself, but in how you anticipate it, interpret it, and feel it. And this happens thousands of times throughout the day. Small internal adjustments that, when combined, create a pattern. And that pattern, over time, manifests as your external reality. But here comes the most interesting part. You've seen this happen before. Many times. You just never connected the dots. Think about that moment when you knew something would go wrong. And it did. Or when you felt confident, aligned, and everything seemed to flow naturally. It wasn't coincidence. It was internal coherence. An alignment between thought, emotion, and expectation. And that alignment created a path. A direction. A tendency. Not because the external world changed first, but because something internal organized the way you interacted with it. Now, if this is true, an inevitable question arises. If this process is always active, why does almost no one use it consciously? The answer is simple, but uncomfortable. Because it's too invisible to be taken seriously. Because it doesn't give immediate credit. Because it doesn't look like concrete action. And mainly because it requires responsibility. It's much easier to blame external circumstances than to observe internal patterns. It's much more comfortable to believe everything is random than to admit there is constant participation, even if unconscious. But the truth is, this process does not depend on your belief. It works anyway, just like gravity doesn't stop existing because someone doesn't believe in it. This mechanism keeps operating. The only difference is whether you are using it in your favor or letting it run on autopilot. And autopilot almost always repeats old patterns. Repeated thoughts, familiar emotions, conditioned reactions, and that creates more of the same. More of the same reality, more of the same results. Now imagine for a moment that you could observe this process happening, as if you could slow down the exact moment a thought arises. As if you could notice the emotion forming right after. And then, instead of reacting automatically, you had a choice. A small intervention, a subtle adjustment. That would change everything. Because you would be acting at the point of origin. Before the pattern solidifies. Before the direction is defined. And this is exactly where most people miss the opportunity. They only try to change when the result has already appeared. When reality is already formed. When the effect is already visible. But changing the effect without changing the cause is like trying to dry the floor without turning off the faucet. It works for a moment, but the problem continues. The process continues, and the results keep coming from the same source. That's why understanding this mechanism is not just interesting, it's essential. Because it completely redefines where you should place your attention, not on what has already happened, but on what is happening right now, internally, in silence. And here is something that can completely change the way you see all of this. Your brain does not clearly distinguish between what is real and what is intensely imagined. When you think about something with enough emotion, your body responds. Your internal chemistry changes, your state changes, and that state influences your decisions, your actions, and even the way you perceive opportunities. In other words, what started as something invisible and internal begins to take shape in the external world. Not instantly, but consistently. Now pause for a moment and observe. What have you been repeating internally over the past few days? What are your most frequent thoughts? What emotions have been dominating your state? Because this is not irrelevant. This is the mold. This is the beginning of the process. And recognizing this is already the first step to changing anything. Because from the moment you see it, you can choose. And when you choose consciously, you step out of autopilot. If this is making sense to you so far, there's something simple you can do right now. Write the word awareness in the comments. That's it. This isn't about random interaction. It's about marking a point. A moment where you decided to observe this process differently. And if you want to keep exploring this kind of knowledge, subscribe and leave a like. Because there are other mechanisms just as invisible as this one that can completely change the way you live. Now, going back to the central point. There is a huge difference between reacting to what happens and influencing what will happen. Most people live reacting, waiting for events, responding to situations, trying to adapt to what is already formed. But when you understand this invisible process, you begin to act earlier. You begin to direct the internal state that eventually transforms into external experience. And that doesn't mean controlling everything. It means influencing the foundation from which everything arises. And the most interesting part is that this doesn't require extreme effort. It doesn't require complicated techniques. It doesn't require hours of daily practice. It requires consistency in something simple. Observing, adjusting, redirecting, small internal changes that, repeated over time, create new patterns. And new patterns generate new realities. Because in the end, everything comes down to this. Patterns. The invisible process that is creating your reality right now is not an isolated event. It's a continuous flow, a sequence of internal micro-decisions. Thoughts you accept or reject. Emotions you feed or transform. Focuses you maintain or shift. And each of these elements contributes to the direction your life takes. Not instantly, but cumulatively. And maybe this is the most important part of all of this. It's not about perfection. It's not about never having negative thoughts or difficult emotions. That's impossible. It's about awareness. About noticing when you are entering a pattern that doesn't serve you. And having the ability to adjust before it becomes dominant. Because once a pattern strengthens, it starts operating on its own. And then it feels like reality is out of your control. But in truth, it's just following a path that has been repeatedly reinforced. Now imagine applying this intentionally, choosing thoughts that generate more aligned states, sustaining emotions that support clarity, confidence, direction, not as an obligation but as a conscious practice. Over time, this changes the way you behave. It changes the way you perceive the world. And inevitably, it changes the results you create. Because in the end, what you see outside is just an organized reflection of what happens inside. And this reflection is not immediate, which is why many people doubt the process. But it is consistent. It always has been, and it always will be. The only variable is the level of awareness you apply. So the next time something happens in your life, instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" maybe the most powerful question is a different one. What was happening inside me before this? Because that's where you find answers. That's where you find power. And that's where the invisible process begins.